So Pokémon Legends Z-A has finally been revealed in more detail than ever before. We now have gameplay, we know many of the featured characters, and we've been able to see ways that this game could change the entire landscape of Pokémon forever. So in this video, we're going to break down everything we now know about Pokémon Legends Z-A and how this game could change the future of Pokémon altogether. So let's start with the way the game looks. And we're going to be talking both positives and negatives here throughout. The game looks very similar to Scarlet and Violet, but with a slight overall improvement. The game looks to have been made in a very similar style to Scarlet and Violet, but the more detailed textures that they tried to implement when developing Scarvy, such as scales and fur textures, seem to have been dropped here. However, the colours seem to have been enhanced, and details like shadows appear to have improved in execution. The protagonists, in my opinion, are the best Pokemon have come up with for a very long time, as they look slightly less generic and have a slightly cooler look exuding conviction. But I have to say that considering the technologies that are out there for developers, some of the games on the Switch that look way better, along with 2.5 years of criticism since Scarvy came out, I was very shocked to see those same aliasing issues and jagged edges when those first frames were revealed to us in shots like this one. However, the fact that the game is contained within one city is going to result in more attention to the environments, and it is a positive that this does at least look like an improvement on Scarlet and Violet. Scarlet and Violet was an all-time low for the company in terms of reception to the visuals, lighting, and overall execution, and so the fact that they've decided to build this game in the same engine is surprising, especially considering the positive reception to the cel-shaded style of Legends Arceus, which I still think is the company's best looking game to date. But clearly something made them stick with this style and tweak it, and so this style is going to define Gen 9 and hopefully will be overshadowed by great gameplay, which we'll come on to in a moment. It's also worth entertaining the possibility that the Switch 2 might vastly enhance the way this looks, and the Pokemon Company might have been embargoed on showing a Switch 2 version of the visuals until Nintendo do their Switch 2 deep dives in April. But let's move on to the game itself, and it really does appear to take place exclusively in Lumio City in modern times, making this essentially a sequel to 2013's Gen 6 titles Pokémon X and Y. Unless of course we entertain the remote possibility that this game takes place in an alternate timeline or alternate dimension. The way we'll be able to explore Lumiose is going to be far richer. Not only will the Switch enable for a total upscaling on the scale of the city, but we'll also be able to travel around the rooftops, apparently using Rotomdex's falling failsafe as a way to parkour across city buildings. And that's just what we've seen. The overall concept of the game seems to be fostering peace and coexistence between people and Pokemon. And this new look Lumiose will now contain wild zones, which function as a nod to traditional routes in older Pokemon games. They are artificially created zones with the intention of allowing Pokemon to thrive and exist peacefully in this very metropolitan environment. And more practically, they seem to be areas where us as the player can go in and catch wild Pokemon. The routes shown so far appear to be very early ones, and they look very small. We can literally see the end zone of the route once we enter it. So from what we see, some or maybe most of these areas are going to be quite cramped and contained. But perhaps the later game ones could be totally different to the ones we've seen so far. The starter Pokemon are Chikorita, Tepig, and Totodile, meaning we have 2 Johto starters and 1 Unova starter. So with the Terraleak in mind, I'll leave it up to your imagination why Cyndaquil might have been kicked out of the club. But in all seriousness, we can take a few things from this. Firstly, it vaguely keeps in line with the Legends Arceus starters in that we have starters plucked from the same generation pool as we saw in that game, just excluding Gen 7, which means if we had another Legends game in a few years to complete the trio of trios, we would see Snivy, Litten, and Poplio. I don't want to read too much into this yet, but if that were the case, it could hint at some wider lore or reason as to why Gen 2, 5, and 7 starters have been chosen specifically for the Legend series rather than just being random. Interestingly, very early on in the Pokemon series, in Gen 2, the starter Pokemon were described as rare Pokemon recently discovered by the professor at that time, possibly implying that they are from other regions rather than native to the region that we first see them in. So Chikorita, Cyndaquil, Nashville, and Totodile are not from the Johto region, but rather were introduced to Johto at the time that game took place by the Professor. And that could be a way to explain why you don't really see them in the wild. But beyond that, according to the Terra leak, we do have an island-hopping main series Pokemon game in the works, whether that's Gen 10 or a completely different project. And whilst we know very few details about it, I have hypothesized that we could take the role of an explorer or professor, and it would be very cool to see all of the starter Pokemon feature as exotic, discoverable Pokemon that we have to go and catch on secluded islands, for example. But speaking of professors, we haven't seen the professor, if there is one, in this game yet. We do know a few of the characters we will meet, however, and the biggest one from a legacy perspective is AZ himself, the enigmatic 3,000-year-old man who, spoiler alert if you haven't played Pokemon X and Y, was reunited with his beloved Floette after 3 millennia the last time we saw him. AZ now looks far less disheveled and appears no longer to be a broken man. In fact, he now runs a hotel called Hotel Z in Lumiose, which is where us as the player will be staying during the game. AZ appears to have his life together now, but I imagine he'll have a huge role in the plot. Not only did he create an ultimate weapon which destroyed a region and killed many people and Pokemon, not only did he discover the secrets to eternal life and grow taller from his exposure to the ultimate weapon, but he's lived through at least 30 generations of history, seeing people and Pokemon come and go. And so he's probably deeply aware of Zygarde and its role as the Order Pokemon, along with many other legends about Kalos in general. Remember, though he seems to be at peace with his character arc at the end of X and Y, part of his history is that he was once extremely vengeful and brutal. So if his Floette was to be taken from him again, for example, what version of AZ we would get remains to be seen. We also have Urbane and Tawny, one of which will appear as your ally depending on which character you pick. They seem to be a stylized version of the protagonist, and I think the designs are pretty solid, just like the protagonists themselves. And it has been hypothesized by a few people that these characters all look quite similar to the Professor from X and Y, Professor Sycamore. But this could just be a coincidence. We also have Jet and Vinny, Jet being the CEO of an organization called Quasartico Inc., and Vinny being her secretary. Vinny has a pretty striking design, with his mean sideburns and a bun held together by Pangoro and Lopunny ties, possibly hinting at the Pokemon and maybe even the Mega that he uses. Jet seems to have these crescent-looking earrings and very bright eyeshadow, but more interestingly to me is the symbol of the corporation, which Jet also seems to have pasted all over her outfit. Now, I've speculated about the inclusion of Rayquaza in the Z-A story on this channel before, because canonically, Rayquaza holds the key to Mega Evolution. X and Y of course introduced Mega Evolution without explicitly telling us its origins, and Oras elaborated on this by telling us that Rayquaza has an organ within that reacts to meteoroids that it eats and gives it the power to Mega Evolve without a Mega Stone. So it would make sense that if someone was trying to use or understand the power of Mega Evolution to harness for some selfish need, Rayquaza would be an essential component to that. And when you look at the green boots and shirt that Vinny wears, the name Quasartico and the symbol having a striking resemblance to the moment that Mega Rayquaza smashes through the meteoroid in the Delta episode, I think we have some solid suggestions there of what these guys might be up to, trying to harness the innate power of Rayquaza. Plus, the triangular wallpaper within the Quasartico headquarters is very reminiscent of Mega Rayquaza's Delta symbol and the emerging form of Deoxys when it comes out of the destroyed meteorite, both of which are triangles. However, the symbol could also relate to the ultimate weapon raining down on the region it destroyed, or more simply just a reference to a quasar in nature and the energy that one emits. So the truth on that remains to be seen. The Legends style catching system returns once again, but this time there is a massive game-changing update to the battle system, whereby there is a real-time element to it. This means you'll have to time both offensive and defensive moves in battle, and you have the ability to dodge attacks, just like in the anime. This brings a whole new range of strategizing and reaction-based thinking to the gameplay, and this could be a real milestone for the franchise. Whilst I do think this system will be amazing, I do think it will remain in the Legends series going forwards as well, but depending on how popular it ends up being, they might include it in Gen 10 in some capacity. Though I don't think it will outright replace the traditional battling style, especially with the emergence of Pokémon champions. But this will bring a whole new level of excitement, skill, and jeopardy to battles, and hopefully we'll be able to battle other players in multiplayer using this new system. And of course, Mega Evolution does return, seemingly with all of the existing Mega Pokémon returning, though this isn't confirmed, but we do see a variety of many Mega Pokémon in the trailers. And yes, of course, this means we'll be able to use Mega Pokémon in the real-time battle system, giving us a big power boost and edge in battle. It already looks amazing in battle, and the animation still looks great whilst being nice and snappy, maintaining the flow of the gameplay. I would suspect that new Megas will happen, but we haven't heard anything about them just yet. And finally, we saw this teaser clip at the end, which appears to tease a promotion match tournament taking place in the Prism Tower. The interesting thing about this clip is that it's the Scarlet and Violet Rotom deck sound that appears to chime. So this could suggest some sort of final DLC perhaps for Scarlet and Violet, or just a reference to Paldea characters within Legends Z-A, and potentially characters from the other two regions participating in a major battling tournament in Kalos. After all, if the geography of Kalos and Paldea are anything like their real-life counterparts, France and Iberia, the two regions would share a border, and so there could be some link there. Ideally, we'd see a massive battle competition with legacy characters from many regions returning, but let me know what you think down in the comments. That's it for today's breakdown, and I'm sure there'll be many more theories emerging and new teasers that will drop between now and the release date, perhaps most notably around the time the Switch 2 details emerge in April. So leave your thoughts down below, and until next time, love you gang.